Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday to you. I hope that you had a great weekend. And this is the next session in our webinar series of orientation for new senior administrators. And today we have the honor of having Tawanda Foster-Artis with us, and she is the general counsel here at the Community College System Office. And we're excited to hear her speak with us a little bit about the governance and board relationships, especially up here at the system office. Her expertise, since I've met her just here recently, has been very good as we've attempted to interpret legislation and interpret state board code. I've pitched to her some pretty difficult, challenging questions, and it's been great having conversations with her, and I've appreciated her expertise and her wisdom. And I think you will enjoy that this morning as well. So without further ado, I'll turn the mic over to you, Tawanda.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. And I'm unsure if we have an hour and a half for this, but I assure you I will not take the full time for whatever we have, okay?
Sounds good.
But I'm happy to take whatever questions folks might have either as we go along or at the end. So as Dr. Kelly said, we're going to talk today about governance and board relations. I have a little bit of information as well about the legislature and about public records, just things that I think are really important for you to know as you're going through your day to day. So let's jump right in with governance. So we talk a lot about, we do it this way because, but part of my role as a general counsel is to help you understand why we do it that way. It's usually because of one of these things in this chart. Either our state constitution requires it, our state statutes that are made by our General Assembly requires it, our state Board of Community Colleges code, which has the same effect as law, requires it, or it's a policy established by your local Board of Trustees. There are a few other governance items that color the work for community colleges. For example, federal law. So things like FERPA and private student information. So let's talk about these sources again. Again, the general statutes, which some people call them the green books, but they are literally the codified law of our state. The community colleges code. I guess, Dr. Kelly, most people on this call are relatively new to the community college system. But if you had been around maybe 10 years ago, you would know that we used to have our policies in the North Carolina Administrative Code, which is the code document for lots of state agencies across the state. Back in about 2014 or 15, we decided to develop our own code. And codify those and bring the rulemaking function in-house, if you will, for the system office. And then there are lots of college policies, usually again, determined by your local Board of Trustees that determine how we interpret the state board code and how it applies on your campuses. So let's talk about the General Assembly a little bit. Fun fact about me is that I worked at the General Assembly for about 6 years before I joined the system office staff. My role there was as a nonpartisan attorney, meaning that I worked for all parties, all members, and any of the 170 members could be my quote unquote state agency client at any point in time. So you can imagine the fun times that happen when you've got 170 potential bosses and clients. So there are 120 members of the House of Representatives and 50 senators. They're elected by district. There are legislative elections literally every 2 years. So you can imagine that the legislative agenda changes very frequently as members come and go. Typically, districts are redrawn every 10 years based on the census numbers. We are in the redistricting process right now with our legislature. The interesting thing about redistricting is that we have not had a plan in our state that has not been challenged in the courts in at least, I would say, the last 10 years, maybe more than that. And so what happens is these plans go into litigation, and then the court makes whatever ruling they make, and they may have to be redrawn. So I would argue our state has been in a perpetual state of redistricting for at least the last 10 years. Okay, so the General Assembly is our lawmaking branch of government. If you remember, if some of you are old enough to remember the little info piece that used to come on TV, I'm a bill on Capitol Hill. That really applies to how our General Assembly makes law at the state level as well. Kimberly, I'm glad I'm not alone in that you remember that. But it applies at the state level as well. That little informational piece is aimed at federal lawmaking, but it happens the same way at our state level. The legislature enacts laws. They're called bills until they're enacted. They become session laws after they're enacted. And once they're codified into our green books or our statute books, they're referenced as statutes. When we cite them, we cite general statute, section, and then the number. So a lot of times the abbreviation we see is GS. Karen, I'm glad I'm not alone. And so we have that. That's consistent with our US and our North Carolina Constitution. And specifically, most of our statutes are codified under Chapter 115D of the General Statutes. It's important to note other state statutes apply things under Chapter 143, things like public meetings law, closed sessions law, procurement rules, all those things apply to community colleges as well. The General Assembly also appropriates funds. They make 8 appointments to the State Board of Community Colleges, 4 from the House and 4 from the Senate. And they may also make appointments to local boards of trustees or other changes to local community colleges through local bills. Cleveland Community College is one example of that. Okay, there we go. I couldn't get it to advance for a moment there, but it's par for the course with my computer issues today. So let's talk a little bit more about the State Board of Community Colleges. How many people know how many members there are on the State Board of Community Colleges? If you do, you can drop it in the chat. This is an interesting question because this number changed this year within the last couple of months. So up until a couple of months ago, there were 21 members of the State Board of Community Colleges. There are now 22 members of the State Board of Community Colleges. The change was made by the legislature, like I said, a couple of months ago. We have 10 appointees from the governor, 6 that track with the trustee regions, and 4 from the state at large, 4 appointees from the House and Senate each. Their terms up until a few months ago was 6 years each. It has been changed now to 4 years each, and they may not have more than 2 consecutive terms. There are a number of ex officio members, the lieutenant governor or his designee, the state treasurer or his designee, the commissioner of labor or his designee. As well, the Comprehensive Student Government Association has an ex officio member who is non-voting. And I will tell you, this year we had a very hard time getting a Comprehensive Student Government Association president to participate. And I'm sure that's something that you might have noticed across your colleges as well. The general statute requires, that governs State Board Code requires that they meet at least 10 times a year. Normally they take June and December off. However, we have met in June and we will meet again in December of this year. So it's busy times at the system office and for the State Board. So here are some key statutes just for you to remember and take note of when you're looking for information on how to do something. We'll run through a little bit on each of these. So let's start first with the community college system and its purpose. General statute requires that it provide for the establishment, organization, and administration of a system of educational institutions, that it offers courses in one or more general areas of 2-year college parallel, technical, vocational, and adult education program. It serves as the legislative charter for these institutions, and it can authorize the levying of local taxes and the issuing of local bonds for the support of the schools. The major purpose of community college schools are to offer vocational and technical education and training, and a basic high school level academic education needed in order to participate and profit from the vocational and technical education. So one of the ways that we meet this mission and this purpose is through the establishment of the System Office as an umbrella or oversight organization for the community colleges. General Statute 115D3 created the System Office as the principal administrative department of state government under the direction of the State Board of Community Colleges. So when you think of the hierarchy, think of the State Board of Community Colleges as first. The System Office and president and his staff underneath that, and then the umbrella folding out into all of the great 58. The System Office has the authority to adopt and administer all policies, regulations, and standards which it deems necessary for the operations of the System Office. So the State Board of Community Colleges also has a purpose and a mission, and is authorized in our state statutes under 115D5A. It states that they may adopt and execute such policies, regulations, standards concerning the establishment, administration, and operation of institutions as the state board may deem necessary to, number one, ensure the quality of educational programs, number two, promote the systematic meeting of educational needs of the state, and number three, to provide for equitable distribution of state and federal funds to the institutions. And then local boards of trustees. This is where I think you will have the most focus. And this General Statute 115D20 has, I can't recall, maybe about 14 different responsibilities, rights and responsibilities that local boards of trustees can take. I'm just highlighting a few here for you. They elect the president or chief administrative officer and elect and employ other personnel for the community college. They can purchase land, easement, or right-of-ways. They can also lease land. They apply the standards and requirements for admission and graduation. They can also receive and accept donations, gifts, and the like from private donors. So let's talk a little bit about state board code. If you remember the slide that we started with, it talked about the state board governance being the state constitution, state laws from the General Assembly, and state board code. So state board code, again, is essentially administrative rules. Like I said, it used to be codified in a statewide document called the North Carolina Administrative Code. It was pulled out to its own document that we now manage and that we do what's called rulemaking on. Rulemaking is whenever we go in and change anything in the state board code. We can do it by adopting new provisions, modifying existing provisions, or repealing provisions in the state board code. The state board code has the full force and effect of law. And I think sometimes people miss that or think because it's not in the general statutes, it's not law. It is still law, and community colleges are required to follow the requirements of the state board code. It's important to note that this process allows for public comment, and public comment can come from anyone. It can come from you all at the community colleges. It could come from a citizen or student at a community college. But it is designed to give the people of the state an opportunity to impact policy as well. Numbered memos are the way that we communicate about new state board policy. So if you're not the person that receives one on your campus, someone on your campus likely receives a numbered memo, at least one from me almost every month, that talks about new changes to the state board code. So a little bit more detailed look at the rulemaking process. The first step is drafting. That usually happens when a member of the system office staff, and quite frankly, it could be anyone can propose a change to the state board code. So anyone could come to me as general counsel and say, I want to change the state board code and I want to file a petition to do so. And this is what I want the change to be. And I will work with them on drafting the change, putting it in the appropriate format and getting the appropriate language. Then it will go out for some form of vetting. That may be subject matter experts within the system office, could be the President's Association or the Trustees Association. Then it's presented at a state board meeting as a proposal, and the state board will vote to initiate rulemaking. Once it's received at the state board level, it goes out for that 30-day comment period I told you about. The comments are emailed back into us. We review the comments before the next state board meeting and present a review of those comments. If the comments make substantive changes or request substantive changes to the proposed rule, then it goes back out for an additional 5-day public comment period. If there are no substantive changes, and by that we mean substantive basically means anything not technical. You know, it's not about grammar, there's not a typo. It makes some change that makes a difference in the rule. So if it's not substantive, then it can move forward and the state board can adopt the rule. Rules go into effect the first day after the month it was approved by the state board. So a few interesting things in state board code that you may want to be a part of. The first is state planning and priorities. Title I, Chapter A of the State Board of Community Colleges Code, Subchapter 200, Section 0.2, talks about state planning and our strategic plan, and that we are required to adopt a system-wide plan on at least a biennial basis. It's coordinated with the budget cycle. And there are a lot of places and parties that get to have input into this. Our System Advisory Council, President's Association, Trustee Association. And you may hear very soon, we're about to undertake our regional meetings for the next strategic plan. The one that's pictured here is 2018 to 2022. So the system office staff and the state board has already started undertaking the planning for the new strategic plan to go into effect for 2023 forward. And so there'll be a series of regional meetings scheduled across the state where stakeholders are invited to come out and express their opinions or thoughts about the new strategic plan. So by all means, if you see that and there's one close to your college and you want to participate, you absolutely should.
Wanda?
Yes.
Yeah, the System Advisory Council, that's something that's relatively new. Could you talk a little bit about who's a part of that council and kind of what role they play?
I can. I'll jump ahead one slide and then we'll come back.
Okay.
So
If you've already got that planned, you don't have to jump answer it now.
Okay, so let's go through delegation of authority to local boards of trustees, and then we'll come back to the System Advisory Council. So state board code does allow the delegation of authority to local boards of trustees on matters related to internal administration, regulation, and governance of an individual college, with some exceptions. One, that the law does not require that it not be delegated, that it can't be matters that impact the entire system or are related to multiple colleges. The state board can rescind this delegation of authority at any time that it deems appropriate. And the governing authority of the state board still has assurance of fiscal accountability, program accountability, and satisfaction of the state priorities. So if there's something that happens on your college that it seems like it's required at the state board, but your local board of trustees is doing it, it's possible that they have this delegation of authority. However, if it's one of those 4 exceptions, they should not be undertaking that without approval of the state board. So now to Dr. Kelly's question about the System Advisory Council. Again, that's also in Title I of the State Board Code. It is a fairly new body. I believe it was created under President Peter Hahn's leadership. maybe, Dr. Kelly might have to help me out. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes, ma'am, that's my memory as well.
Okay. I know that it was prior to, I believe, 2020.
Mhm.
Or maybe sometime 20. Don't quote me on it. It's fairly recent. Let me just stick to that. It is a standing committee of the State Board of Community Colleges. They discuss issues and make recommendations to the State Board on issues of system-wide or inter-college importance. One of the most recent things they've undertaken was a diversity task force. And they created this task force that was created by, that was composed of a number of community college presidents. And so the presidents then undertook this work to review diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across the Great 58 and report back to the System Advisory Council. If my memory serves me correctly, there were 12 presidents on the task force. They gave their report to the System Advisory Council a couple of months ago. They highlighted a number of issues that they'd like to see changed related to RDS, to small student debts, to the State Board Code. And they also engaged Jobs for the Future to help with that work. And JFF came out with a pretty comprehensive report. They cited at least 38 places where the State Board Code is silent related to diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. As well as they put out kind of this guidebook for colleges who are considering diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. So the composition of the System Advisory Council are 4 State Board of Community College board members that are appointed by their chair, 4 Board of Trustee members appointed by the Trustees Association, 4 community college presidents appointed by the Presidents Association, again, the Comprehensive Student Government Association president, and the system office president serves as the chair of the System Advisory Council and is non-voting. So the Diversity Task Force did make their report again to the System Advisory Council. The System Advisory Council made their report on the Diversity Task Force issue to the State Board at their last meeting, October meeting. The State Board adopted 3 of the recommendations from the System Advisory Council by way of the President's Diversity Task Force. One around small student debts, one around partnering on RDS to make it more usable and student friendly. And then also to look at those 38 provisions of State Board Code that are silent as to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those 38 issues will go through the rulemaking process that we just talked about. So that's one of the bigger items that my staff will start to work on very soon, is working through State Board Code for those 38 items and getting them ready for rulemaking. There are also a number of special committees of the State Board. The State Board bylaws allow special committees to be established as needed. The Enrollment Task Force is one of them. Was designed to understand enrollment and demographic trends. Its membership includes some trustees, some presidents, some State Board members, a community college employee, and a former interim president. So I won't go into a lot of detail about the legislative process. I believe you all have probably had a session from someone on that, but I do want to hit just a few of the high points because we're talking about state statutes and the importance of them as governing law. So I know this quote to be true firsthand from my 6 years of seeing them being made firsthand. All right, so there's usually a legislative agenda pushed forward from the system office. We work a lot with the President's Association, their legislative and finance committees to develop those legislative priorities. Then we get the endorsement of the Trustees Association and submit them to the legislature. And we do have a Director of Government Affairs on staff at the system office. His name is Alex Fagg. And Alex is our mouthpiece that goes over to the General Assembly and advocates for all of our needed resources. So other sources of legislation that may come up and that may impact what we see from the legislature every year. The governor's budget, legislators' priorities or interests. Remember, I talked about how legislators are elected every 2 years. So every 2 years, there are new people coming in with new, fresh ideas that they want to see happen. Legislative study commissions and studies done by the community college system that are mandated or reported back to the legislature. So here are some of the groups that we tend to work with. The system office works with the House and Senate Education Appropriations chairs and the House and Senate full appropriation chairs. Our presidents and trustees work with their local delegation. So your local members who represent your House of Representatives or your Senate members that represent your local area. And then the system president also works with the speaker and president pro tem from the Senate. So let's talk a little bit about legislative process. Laws get drafted. That was one of my jobs when I was over at the legislature, is to draft legislation. It's introduced and then it's referred to committee. My other job was as committee counsel. So as bills went through committee, I would give summaries of them, update the members on them, answer any questions, prepare any amendments or what we call proposed committee substitutes to change the bills. It'll go to its first chamber for a vote. If it meets the appropriate crossover deadline, it can go to the second chamber for a vote. If the second chamber doesn't concur, then it may go to a conference committee and conferees are appointed. There's a conference report. The bodies vote on it again, ratify it and send it to the governor for signature. We know the governor may sign, may not. If he does not, that's called a veto. And 2/3 of the legislature can override a veto. I'm not even going to get into long and short session because I feel like they've gone away now. I think our General Assembly is pretty much in a perpetual legislative session. And then a little bit on the budget process. Again, this has changed a lot over the years. A few years ago, it was almost unheard of for us to not have a new budget starting the new fiscal year. It's now November 15th, and we start our fiscal year July 1 for state government, and we still don't have a budget. So a lot of things have changed. And then some of you may see individual funds for colleges when you look at the budget. They're typically special project issues, non-recurring funds, and maybe targets or things from other legislators. The system office may oppose them if it takes away from our agreed upon priorities. But again, it still happens a lot where there are individual asks made and individual projects funded at times. So where can you get more information? This website is your best friend if you need to know what's going on at the legislature. It allows you to track bills. It allows you to review the bills and know that bills go through a number of drafts. And so it really does require tracking really almost weekly if you have a budget issue or a legislative issue that you're watching for your college. If we have time and if someone wants, we can walk through this a little bit more, but I'll keep going in the interest of time and allowing plenty of time for your questions. So this slide just has a few hints on how to track if you want to track certain things. Again, I won't go into a lot of detail there. And again, not going to go in detail here because this falls in line with the long session and short session and the interim breaks between sessions that I don't think happens much anymore. When I first joined the central staff at the legislature, everybody said, oh, we work really hard during legislative session. You know, you work really late nights, but then you have these interim periods of 3 to 6 months and work is much better and life is good. And so I started working and, you know, working sometimes to 11 p.m., 2 a.m., you know, just doing what had to be done because we were in legislative session and Sometimes the members want to stay late. They stay late, their attorneys have to stay late. And then we got to interim and they kept going and going and going. And we never really had a full interim while I was there. And so I think we've seen these periods go away a lot of times. When they do have them, they have a lot of study committees that work during that time. So I just wanted to hit a few high points on public records, because I know that this is a big issue that colleges face. Most of you should have a records retention officer that governs or handles your records for the college. But just a few high points on public records. So this is the public policy on public records. It's codified in our statute in chapter 132(1). It talks about the policy being that the people of the state own copies of their public records and should be able to access those public records free or at minimal cost unless otherwise provided by law. And there are a few stipulations on this. Generally, if you get a public records request, you will answer it and you will not charge the public citizen anything for it because as the law states here, it is their record. However, if it's an exhaustive public records request, voluminous records, takes a lot of time, heavy redacting, then there is a provision in the law that allows you to pass that cost along to the citizen. So what's a public record? Almost anything you can imagine. Here are just some notes on what counts as a public record. It's important to note that your personal emails and personal text messages on your personal cell phone could be a public record if it's connected to the public business in any way. So you might want to consider that as you're transacting business, or if you use your personal cell phone or your personal email in any way in connection with work. There are some exceptions for confidential records that are not subject to public records law. Things like trade secrets, account numbers for electronic payments, documents, file numbers, passwords, things related to the Advanced Healthcare Directive Registry, date of birth, signature, driver's license number, or portions of Social Security numbers, the seal of a licensed design professional, information related to closure and realignment of military installations, and information about personnel from drug manufacturers or suppliers, identifying information for lottery winners within 90 days of any requested anonymity period, and proprietary design or work product. I'm talking too fast now. So destruction of public records, this is also important, and your records retention professional on your campus can help you to determine when you may destroy or get rid of records. If you do not retain them or destroy them outside of what the law provides, you could be guilty of a Class 3 misdemeanor. So you want to be very careful about how you handle public records and retaining them based on the appropriate retention schedule. All right, so I'll stop there for questions. I know that I've talked kind of quickly and given you a lot of information, but I do want you to know that I'm here to answer any questions you have today or in the future going forward.
Thank you, Tawanda. I appreciate also the public records because that's a common question we get often. So any questions, feel free to unmute your microphone and turn on your video camera and or put it in the chat wherever you feel most comfortable. So we do have one question in the chat. Christy, thank you for your question. Is there a plan to move away from individual numbered memos to communicate changes to the code?
There's not a plan for that at this time, Christy. We've heard various feedback about it. Some people feel like they get too many numbered memos. Some people like it as a method of communication to kind of alert them almost immediately. I don't think there is any set plan right now to go away from it. We've looked at ways to consolidate and try to not inundate people with them, but I think we'll keep that process for now.
Thank you. I do have another question as well. Could you go back to that slide on local boards?
Yes. This one?
No, I
One
think
more.
it's the,
I think this is the one you want.
no, it's the delegation of authority one.
Okay. This one.
Yeah, that's the one. I guess I had a question on that last point. So delegates authority to the Board of Trustees, except for, I guess the part of it is the governing authority of the state board. I guess that makes sense. I got my question was related to things like program accountability and fiscal accountability. If the local board could establish their own benchmarks or guidelines that are different from the state board, as long as they aren't lower than the state boards. Like, so for example, if, and I guess it wouldn't necessarily be legal, but let's say that the board wanted to see all their programs with a 70% pass rate or something like that. They wouldn't have legal authority to do it, but it would be within their right to say, this is our expectation and get regular reports. Is that correct or no?
So a local board can have more stringent requirements than the state board, but it cannot have less. So using your example, let's say the state board requirement is 70%. The local board can say, we want 80%, but they could not say we want 60%. So you can always go higher than the state board, but you can't go lower.
I've always found it interesting when thinking of the Board of Trustees and the State Board of Community Colleges that the general statute before the State Board Code also lays out a lot of the powers and authorities that local boards of trustees have as well, I think. Am I remembering correctly, Tawanda?
You are, and I want to say it's roughly 14 or so. I'm going to try to pull it up because I did not want to list them all out for you. I felt like that might be a little bit of overkill, but I can show you. And actually, I'm going to put this, let's see if I can put this on my shared screen. I'll tell you what I'll do. Because I think this will be a good exercise for y'all, seeing one way to use the General Assembly's website. So one way that I use this, although I have access to legal databases, this one is free and the system office doesn't get charged when I use the legislature's website. So what I did was I just went to the top for bills and laws and went to the general statutes table of content. So whenever you're trying to find a general statute related to community colleges, you can go to chapter 115D. And then the specific statute on powers and duties of trustees. And this is the list. So we talked about a few of these, electing the president, managing the personnel, purchasing land, easements, standards for admission or graduation, receiving, accepting donations and gifts. They provide all or part of the instructional services and the contracting for such. They encourage the establishment of private nonprofit corporations to support the college. They enter into guaranteed energy savings contracts, loan agreements, lease purchases or installment purchases for contracts for equipment or real property. Things that permit the use of personnel or facilities by a private business. They enter into public-private partnerships. So there are a number of things that your local board of trustees can do under 115D20.
And am I right in thinking that the state board code cannot take away those duties and responsibilities that the statute delegates to the board of trustees?
They cannot, you are
How do
correct.
they? Okay.
They have to, kind of like Christie's question, they can add more stringent requirements, but they cannot, I'm sorry, the state statute is the most stringent requirement. And then the state board code can add lower levels. So, or things that I guess the best way to say it is the state board code can offer interpretation and application for the colleges. So our state board code is on our community colleges website for anyone who doesn't know. When you're looking for state board code items, you can easily find them here. It's not always the easiest to use. And so that as we're undertaking our redesign of our website, that's one of my goals for legal affairs. And this website is to have a more user-friendly state board code. But I'll show you subchapter 300 of Title 1 of the state board code that talks about each college operating under the direction of a board of trustees, a body corporate, having all the power and authority vested by law in the state board. And then also, this is exactly where that language came from for your question, Christy, about those items like fiscal accountability, program accountability, and satisfaction of state priorities.
Thank you, Tawanda. I'll make a confession to everybody. I think when I first started as an administrator in the community colleges over a decade ago, I failed to understand that the state board code also has proprietary schools in it. So you have to be careful and make sure you're looking in Title I with the community colleges and not in that other area. I know nobody else on the line would ever make that mistake, but I thought I would point that out.
It is organized in a very interesting manner, Dr. Kelly, as you point out. Look for your title. So Title I is all community colleges. Title II, let's see if I can get to Title II. Clearly, Title II is proprietary schools. Title III is the formatting, our rulemaking process, and the codification system. And we just recently, back in April, added a Title IV, which is on apprenticeships.
Any other questions for Tawanda? Feel free to unmute your microphone or put them in the chat. Well, any closing comments, Tawanda?
I want to just note one more thing. I really thought about putting a slide or two in here on COVID-19 because it's such a hot button issue, and that's where I get the majority of questions from campuses right now, especially with the federal vaccine mandates. And the president, myself, and Commissioner of Labor, Josh Dobson, did a session with all of the Great 58 presidents last week to talk about that and to provide some guidance. I would say that the law is still changing. Both major aspects of the federal vaccine mandate have been stayed by our courts right now. But we do believe we'll see movement within the next couple of months on that. So if you have questions for how that applies to your college, what things to be on the lookout for, especially if you're going to undertake a new policy related to it, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to have a conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm sure everybody else does as well. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I do want to take a moment before everybody leaves and to share our agenda for the week, because there's been some small changes to the agenda, and I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to see it. Just as a reminder, for tomorrow, the apprenticeship and customized training, Dr. Mack will be here to talk about that. That's at 11 o'clock tomorrow, not at our normal 10 o'clock time. So that will begin at 11 o'clock tomorrow. And then on the 17th, President Stith was not available at 1 o'clock, so we needed to move him later in the day. So that'll be at 3:30 on the 17th. Is when he'll be able to speak with us for a few minutes, and we'll be able to get to hear from him, which I think is really good. There'll only be one Zoom link for this entire day. So there won't be separate links for each one of these events. There'll just be one Zoom link. And we understand that many of you, you have things going on your campus. And so we will record all the sessions, and we understand if you kind of have to come in and come out based upon your schedule for that day. And then on the 18th, we had to move things a little bit around because the state board finalized their committee meeting schedule. And so we will do the activity that we've entitled the Comprehensive View of Student Pathways. That will now be at 1 o'clock on the 18th. And then at 2:15 is when the programs committee is meeting. We'll be streaming that via YouTube, but we'll do that, we'll share that YouTube sharing on the Zoom. So that way you can still use the same Zoom link for everything that day on the 18th. We felt like it would be helpful for you to see and hear kind of the conversations that happen in the programs committee, because most of the things that you deal with on your campus would go through that programs committee. And so we think that would be helpful to listen in on that committee. And that will be the official ending of our orientation webinar series. So I wanted to make sure you knew about those small changes to the agenda. I do want to mention lastly is that the programs committees and all the state board committees and the state board meeting on Friday mornings are typically streamed on the YouTube channel, and you can find that link on our website. And so that's something you can feel free to do just as the general public. You're allowed to attend and listen in, except for when they go into closed session. I do want to mention as well that our website will have all the materials that are public for the state board meetings too. So it can be helpful to go on there to see what agenda items the state board is looking at the upcoming meetings. So I want to make sure that you knew those were available. Well, thank you for letting me make that little announcement to everybody. Also, thank you to Wanda. We appreciate everything that you have done for us this morning. And we'll go ahead and end there. Thank you, everybody.
Happy to join you. Thanks.